Full disclosure, the voice you are listening to now is artificially generated, brought to you by satisphonic.com. See the link in the description for more details. What is the fastest way you've seen someone get fired? My first job was in a small grocery store, and my boss asked a co-worker to do the dishes in the bakery, baking pans, etc. She replied, "I only do my own dishes. Somebody else put these here, so I'm not doing them." I'm serious. Fire me if you want. I won't do them. Boss says, "Okay then, don't bother finishing your shift. Goodbye." New person got access to medical record system. Week 2, looked up our boss and bragged about it. Was walked out and gone the second week. Oh yeah, HIPAA violations will do it every time. First day on the job, gave another co-worker a wet willy. Shh, you not. Lio, this is such a silly reason to be fired. Imagine you have to explain at your next interview. First day on the job, you probably wouldn't even bring it up. First day at work, hired by a temp agency. Me and one other guy, we put stuff in boxes and tape them shut, stack boxes on a pallet. He can't keep up, can barely use a tape gun and decides it's time for break. Goes to the lunchroom and takes a lunch. It was the boss's lunch. He stole the guy's meal his wife prepared for him. Boss man came over 15 miles later and wants to know who ate his Beck, sticky fingers and buck on his shirt. He denies it. I just look at him and the boss and said, "Well, I hope it was good, man." I honestly do not understand people who steal other people's lunches. So stupid and disrespectful. I get taking a bit of coffee creamer or something like that, but how does someone think they can eat someone else's food and not piss people off? How does someone think they can eat someone else's food and not piss people off? They don't think about it. Poor impulse control. I think it's more so that they just don't care. Those type of people just seem incapable of empathy and how others feel when they do shit like that. Lunch thieves are fucking sociopaths. They'd probably commit murder if they won. Thought they would get away with it. And 2, thought they would get anything out of it. Stealing lunch is way easier to get away with and a lot less likely to get pursued. The craziest thing is that they would even want someone else's food. Like I dick about you, but I have zero interest in eating something a stranger made for themselves because it could have put in it. Ordering at a restaurant is different because it's made to order how you ordered it. I read an article somewhere that said that about 10% of people were actually incapable of comprehending the consequences of their actions. Had a co-worker explain to our supervisor how he found this great loophole for making extra money. If a customer had exact change, he'd just pocket the cash and cancel the order on the register. It's called counting the pennies. It's been around forever. Decades ago, I worked for a cleaning company. One of our clients was a fine dining restaurant owned by a family. The mother and father, one of their daughters and her husband. He was a twat. Always had a new car every 6 months, Rolex, the works, and an ego to match. My boss and the owner complained they were seemingly constantly packed but not making much money. One morning when we got there, a crew was running cable in the dropped ceiling. They told us not to tell anybody what they were doing, which was easy because I had no idea. Turns out they were installing hidden cameras. And they found the son-in-law was robbing the place blind. He was counting the pennies in cash and discarding the pennies, taking payments in cash and discarding the receipt. In common practice, the thief kept track of how much he was taking by putting a penny in the drawer for every dollar they stole. At the end of the shift, they would count the pennies and take that many dollars from the till. That way they weren't constantly sneaking money into their pockets. This is how he afforded his fictive lifestyle. The parents retired and sold the restaurant shortly after. I worked at a coffee shop for slave labor, and during the holidays they would sell gift cards. Buy $20, get $5 free. So, at the start of the shift, we would buy a gift card and use it for all cash transaction. Every time you hit 25, we put 5 in the tip jar and bought the next gift card. Corporate loved our gift card sales lot. I delivered pizzas for a couple years in college. They paid us less than minimum wage, and we had to supply our own car, buy our own gas, etc. So we made tips plus $2, 13 cents, or whatever miners got. On a good Friday or Saturday night, whatever, you'd walk out with $150 in tips, having done 50 deliveries or something. But on a shitty Tuesday, you might make $30 on a shift, burn $10 in gas, and end up with like half minimum wage. I don't care about the law either. The boss was not reporting our tips to the IRS other than $1 per delivery, and was also not making us whole with minimum wage if we missed it. So, to make those shifts palatable, we'd save all those coupons we got in the mail, or they sent out, or whatever. Start attaching them to any order they'd fit on. Owner thought his coupon promotions were working great, keeping him afloat on slow days. So upped them. Lol. Meanwhile, we'd be pocketing that $30 or $40 in coupons in cash. Boss also let us eat slices that went past their hours, sitting out and would otherwise be thrown away, or orders that nobody picked up, but would charge us for anything else. So every week or so, there'd be a fresh order with a salad and a couple waters, or something that nobody picked up punched in just to give us a shift meal that wasn't filthy, but everyone was crooked, there, all the way down, starting with the top. I guess the line of thinking is that if the customer required change, he would have to take it out to the till and couldn't pocket anything because the drawer wouldn't balance out at the end of his shift. If it were exact change, then he could cancel it and pocket the money. The till would still be balanced. But there's so much more wrong here. I'm having difficulty wrapping my head around this. Worked at an ISP back in the 90s and had a guy working late shift. Found out quickly he wasn't answering the phone at all, but just playing video games. He was warned. Next day he walks into work with a Voodoo 2 graphics card to install on his work computer to improve the gameplay. Fired before he sat down. Oh God, just reading the word voodoo brought out a flash of memories I buried. That's nuts. I knew a guy who literally did the exact same thing, right down to bringing his own Voodoo 2 card to the office to install in a work machine. It's like they didn't expect a bunch of other nerds to immediately know what he was doing. Also way to ruin it for the rest of us who were all slacking and playing games, but not being idiots about it. That always ends up being an issue. New guy comes in and shares about how others are slacking, but without understanding the nuance that you still have to fucking get your shit done and not be a complete idiot. We had this one dude who must have spent way too much time reading about memes where tech offices were adult playgrounds. Fresh out of college, basically did jack shit, tried to get the CEO to change his job title within the first week, and was just plain unprofessional as fuck. He would have loud conversations about how he liked to go to AME conventions to track down drunk and sloppy cosplay girls. Like Jesus Christ, man. The office hired this new guy who was obviously a bad fit. We would often give people a chance despite interviewing poorly. We hardly had any issues come up. But this one guy failed the drug test for meth, was obviously high during the interview, obviously hasn't showered in over a week, and had no self-awareness whatever. This guy literally walked into a wall while looking right at it. Regional hired him and gave him to me to work on a relatively dangerous site. I put him through the training, got him licensed, and even drove him to the site just to show him around and get him familiar with security procedures and safety protocols. He didn't retain any of that information and would repeat the same question over and over. I pick up my truck from the office and pick him up from home because he lived like 2 blocks from the office and doesn't have a car to get to the work site. That's fine. I don't mind driving people to the site. Keeps me out of the office doing busy work. But during the ride he confessed that he lost his license because of multiple DUIs and he sold his car to buy drugs. I told him to keep the drug stuff at home and only come to me about it if he needs to go to rehab. The owners of the business were always willing to work with addicts and try to get them clean. So our company partnered with a rehab center that had a 6-month program. I explained this and other resources to help him out. Dude looks at me dead in the eye and says I don't want to get clean. I then told him to just come to work sober and don't allow his usage to interfere with work. He was 100% sober at this time. We get to the site and I have him pull out his company, ID which you can to gain access to the site. I drove his ass to the main building where I would show him how to clock in and begin his shift. But he has to take a piss, so I stopped at one of the auxiliary buildings and showed him where the restroom was. 10 minutes pass and I figured he was taking a dump. 20 minutes pass and he's still in there. I go to check on him and found him in the bathroom stall with the door open, completely naked, and a needle hanging from his arm. He had also masturbated and was covered in his own semen. I call an ambulance because I'm not dealing with that. They figured he was overdosing after he passed out and started vomiting, so they took him to the ER. As soon as he was carted off to the hospital, I left the job site and headed back to the office to file his termination paperwork. Didn't even have the chance to get him clocked in law. I gotta say, I have respect for your business, for being willing to work with addict and help them get clean. Too bad this guy was his own worst enemy. Had a supervisor start selling him away from his office, hinted at favorable treatment for anyone who would buy, reported him to her, and when they asked if it was true, he pulled out a catalog and tried to sell them something. Fired on the spot. But then sold the ale ladies some beauty products. I saw a co-worker once make a big boobs gesture as our boss's wife walked past, with our boss walking right behind her. He was packing his shit within 5 minutes. Similar, but it was the boss's daughter. Also not boobs. He loudly exclaimed, "Look at the turd cutter on her." Boss was standing not more than 10 feet away and well within earshot for how loud he said it. The business was mostly customer service, so a few other passers-by also heard it. Guy was there less than a week. Didn't bother me. He was rude and a creep. Boss's daughter was 16, I think at the time. Underage. I hope your boss smiled, shook hands with him, and said congratulations, you just got promoted to customer. I hope the boss would ban the asshole from his business if he's making lewd remarks about the boss's underage daughter. Promoted to trespasser? And then he was fired. Edit. Thanks for the awards, strangers. Bravo. A colleague let a middle school kid drive the bus. Boo, bye. When I was in middle and high school, they hired students with driver's licenses to drive the buses. This was in the 80s. Had a few guys in my fraternity that drove school buses. One of them got fired because he pulled alongside another bus driver he knew, and he had all his grade school kids flip off his friend. Just so happened, the district superintendent was behind the bus and saw it happen. Turns out, he didn't think a bunch of 7-year-olds giving the finger out the window was funny. Also, since they all had a key to the bus barn, none of them ever bought gas, they stole it from the bus barn. I'll add an edit here. A couple of these guys were crazy farm kids from tiny towns. One of them used to go to the bus barn and fill a trash bag with acetylene used for cutting torches and bring it back to a party sometime. He would put a long toilet paper fuse in it and light it. When it went off, it was a bomb. I once saw a guy standing too close, about 10 feet, and it lifted him off his feet and blew him backwards. That acetylene in a trash bag was super dangerous. You have that in your back seat and some static electricity could easily set it off and probably kill you. I'm sorry. What? The guy responsible for opening the shop on Saturday morning went out and got blitzed on Friday night. We showed up to work to find his car in the lot, but the doors locked. He didn't answer his phone. Had to call the owner in to get us inside. Guy was fast asleep under his desk. He was gone before you could say hangover. I had a friend who managed a bar. She got caught on camera, staying behind with a male customer after closing, drinking bottles of crystal without paying for them and fucking him in the bar area. The owner saw it on camera the next morning, went to the bar, found the main door unlocked and open, money still in the till and her asleep in her room upstairs. He banged on the door until she woke up. They had an argument, and she walked out and went to her parents' house. She never went back, not even to get her clothes, etc. She later admitted she didn't go back, as she knew he'd find several thousand in pilfered takings under her mattress. I don't hang out with her anymore. Half an hour. Working in Arby's, new girl shows up. They run her through how to work the cash register on a few dummy orders. She takes a real order or two, and then it gets slow. She asks to duck out for a minute to smoke and never came back. Register ended up being $100 short that day. Always smart to rob a place after giving them your name and address. I mean, that's a pretty good hourly wage they ended up getting. I was on a new team hired for corporate sales. They trained us as a group. We were given the task of creating a presentation with graphs and charts to show how we present to a group and given pointers on how to improve. One guy shows up an hour late, waltzes in and says he's tired from the drive-in and says he needs a coffee before settling in. We are in suit and tie. And he's wearing a dress shirt with a huge eagle on the front and jean. He comes back a few minutes later, and when asked to present, he says he didn't prepare anything, but he's happy to answer any questions they may have about presentations. We all looked at each other in disbelief. Fired on the spot by the manager. I heard that they asked him to return his laptop, and he stiffed them for months before they sent a repo man to his door to pick it up. Dude's first day on a team next to mine gets an assignment. As soon as the lead leaves the area, he leans over to another guy and threatens that if he doesn't do his work for him, he's going to kick his ass after work. I got up to the managers. We walked over and escorted him out. He was there all of 2 hours. On his way out, he's knocking over chairs and screaming that he'll be waiting for us in the parking lot. Fucking nuts! That's a guy who still thinks he's the top bully and the world functions like a schoolyard. Incredible? Spoiler, it does. He's just not good at the post-high version of the game. Still has taunts on his hotbar instead of provoke. What kind of field was this? Video game, K. A pretty wild field. Have lots of crazy stories like that. Dude showed up to his first day after taking acid. Told the boss his acid kicked in. It could happen to anyone. Haha, I had this happen with a coworker once. Showed up like 30 mines early on a Saturday shift, and you could tell something was off. He was too paranoid to help customers and was hiding behind a counter in the back Kinko's and then took his shirt off. I was like, you should probably just go home, man. And was like, yeah, this acid way too strong to work. Got fired. Knew it guy at a small 20 employees. Newspaper I worked at. I showed up early and opened the office. Knew it guy showed up next for his first shift. He was totally, utterly drunk off his tits. Lurching, stumbling, weaking, giggly and slurring. At 8:15 way beyond a hangover. Confessed that he'd had a couple of drinks last night to celebrate his new job. Managing editor came in and paged it guy into his office to talk about the job. I hadn't said a word to anyone about him. Give him enough rope and all that. He was finished by 9:15. I walked home through downtown around 5:00 that afternoon. Ran into it guy outside one of those old men dive bars. He was maybe 28. He was all fucked up again. Told me he'd had a couple of drinks to mourn the loss of his new job. Don't remember his proper name. I'd like to find his LinkedIn to see what became of him. His name was Alcoholic. He showed up to work after a weekend meth bender on a schizophrenic episode, telling us that people were after him and us, then wandering around the building with a pipe and a box cutter, getting more and more aggravated as more of us chained. This is really sad. I worked with someone with schizophrenia. I think at least he didn't tell us, and he was definitely a trip to be around. We're in a group chat, and he tells us often that the cops are coming for him. Sad one, sad one. I worked at the head office of a well-known retailer. One day we had a temp on the reception desk, and no one realized that the bottle of water on her desk was, well, water. As the day went on, the tannoy announcements got worse, just stumbling through names and slurring. Needless to say, everyone thought this was funny, not realizing that she was bladdered and not just crap at the job. Come the end of the day, though, she gets into her car and attempts to drive out of the car park, bouncing off cars and eventually coming to a halt on a grass verd. Spicy water. I will say, our CO is a nice enough guy, thick Iranian accent. Hearing him read the names of people who work for us in Poland is crazy. Not because of the accent, but because of the accent, but because he's bilingual and gets these names way closer than I could. Names like Grzegorz Brzeziksikiewicz. One time I fell asleep on my keyboard, and when I woke up all the Polish commenters were agreeing with me. He filmed from under the door of the women's bathroom. I don't understand how it's possible to do this. That's just disgusting. Hopefully getting fired for that taught him a lesson, at least I hope. I will say, our CEO is a nice enough guy, thick Iranian accent. Hearing him read the names of people who work for us in Poland is crazy. Not because of the accent, but because of the accent, but because he's bilingual and gets these names way closer than I could. Got yelled at for being late. Said some insane shit to the boss over it. Got sent to talk with and threatened with his gun. Then the police showed up and I never saw him again. You'll never guess what career he really wanted, but got scammed out of. Our guy then drove to the nearest FBI field office and demanded the arrest of our hair manager for discrimination. You can't make this shit up. A guy got fired at my bar for shaving his head in the beer cooler.
Why? His kids had lice. He even sang a song about how he was high and shaving on the boss man's time. There's a video too. You can see the jeans staring in what shock in the background.
I believe we have a right to said video. I did the firing. I was sous chef of a large reception hall, meaning serving food to hundreds and hundreds of guests. One party had a big seafood display. Shrimp, oysters, crab legs, vodka, all in a giant decorative box of ice. When that portion of dinner service was finished, 2 new waiters were tasked with returning the big icebox leftovers to the kitchen and dish pit. They dumped the ice back into the ice machine. the contaminated ice. It even had some discarded shells. I saw it happen. I had to show them the door immediately and have a serious talk with their head waiter. They lasted 2 hours tops. Those idiots could have killed someone. Imagine you have a severe shellfish allergy and the ice in your glass of water is lethal. Yuck, I'm so glad you caught them. That's just disgusting. Jesus, I used to work in restaurants, and that was like reading a scary story. Even with it getting caught, you then have to remove all of the ice and sanitize the bin, which I've done, and it's not fun. You're then going to be short on ice for at least a day, if not more, depending on variables. Exactly. If I remember correctly, we had nearly 800 guests that night, while the building had 2 ice machines. With one down, we quickly emptied the other and had to send people out in a rush to buy ice. It was a disaster. The ice machines were a good 5-minute walk from each other, so during the rush it caused all kinds of unusual foot traffic and bottlenecks. And yup, I've emptied sanitized ice machines too. They're not fun to do. Plus, and this is disgusting, it's one of the most overlooked pieces of equipment when it comes to cleaning. I've seen grey sludge in some of them from years of neglect, ice cubes with sludge flakes stuck to them. Yup. That's so revolting. Thank goodness you're responsible and fired them. I've seen people complain how Gordon Ramsay is exaggerating the shit he deals with for drama on shows like Kitchen Nightmares, but people must not realize how frustrating it is considered the people who fuck up on this caliber, especially enough to hurt other people, are grown as men would. You get a source, I feel bad for you, man, lol, but thank you for being rigid. Extremely frustrating. High-volume kitchens with that much people money flowing through are incredibly stressful, so when someone puts the lives of the clients at risk, it's both barrels. Right away, no excuses, no compromises. Out. Now, I had to keep my eye on like 24 kitchen staff and the service staff while managing all the timings, temperatures and so on. Max stress. So if someone messes up, they're eating my shit with the weight of the max stress behind it, and I expected no more of an answer beyond yes, chef. That's what I was underpaid to do, like many cooks on the higher rungs of the shit kitchen ladder. As someone who has watched all of Kitchen Nightmares and his similar shows, like Hotel Hell, including the UK versions with less injected drama, I feel that he's actually holding back a lot of his anger. Sure, there's some drama for the show's sake, like his little "I'm gonna puke" parts, but the times when he's straight up telling people they're poisoning their guests, it's real. I can't even begin to explain how working in a kitchen like that requires thick skin, or how the intensity of it makes sense. Feeding people is really serious business and requires heavy hitters like I was to keep people in check. The landscape is slowly changing from militaristic to something softer, which is alright by me, just so long as food safety is always taken 100% seriously. I don't think people should be yelled at like I used to, but when they're potentially killing the client, justified. Sorry, went nuts with the writing there. Worked at a grocery store a few years ago. A new guy was hired, and on the second day on the job, he was caught stealing food. He would grab items off the shelves and walk to the break room and eat them. I thought everything was free if you worked at a grocery store. Came out from the back and joined us while we were talking about work-related stuff, and he had a beer can in his hand. I immediately stopped talking about what I was talking about before, and asked him, "Dude, what the fuck are you doing?" Him. What does it look like? My boss. That's not a fucking juice, dude, that's a spiked seltzer. It's alcohol. Him. Faff Duxo. Takes another sip, he was 16. He was fired on the spot and had to be dragged out because he was adamant it wasn't a big deal and threatened to stab me with his pocket knife when I tried taking it from him. Edit. Had to add a few words I forgot to put before. The seltzer was a spiked seltzer, meaning it's alcoholic. Funny thing that happened to a friend of mine, but on accident. He drank sangria at a work event. He was 16, Mexican, and didn't drink, so he thought it was these Mexican sodas labeled sangria. Non-alcoholic. None of us knew about sangria being an actual alcoholic drink, since his Mexican family wasn't big on alcohol. To be fair, as an American, I would have done the same with cider at that age. I was only aware of cider as apple juice, variant, and didn't realize it could also refer to alcoholic drink. Cider in the UK is what the US calls hard cider. Always thought it was strange when parents referred to giving their kids cider, before I realized it's basically just apple juice. First day at work for this new dude. We pick him up at 7:0. He hops into the car and goes, geez. When are we finishing work today? In beat. Can you guys buy me a pack of cigarettes? Oh, and just so you know, I only eat meat for lunch. The boss stopped the car and told him to get out. It was like 7:3. I only eat meat for lunch. Did they mean like meat-centric food or like just meat? Like a sandwich minus bread and anything but the meat. Steak sandwiches, only cooked steak in between 2 slabs of raw sirloin, washed down with blended bone marrow. Maybe he had to take the job when looking while on unemployment, but didn't want to actually work. Working security at a concert venue. Co-worker confiscated a mini bottle of Fireball that someone snuck in, and then he drank it in front of everyone. Instantly went from confiscation, part of the job, to stealing and also drinking on the job. Hitting on the boss's 13-year-old son. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Don't say doing your wife, don't say doing your wife, doing your son. During drop-off hours, our preschool receptionist decided she needed to have coffee ASAP. Instead of heading down to our staff room and making a pot, she decided to leave our whole school unlocked and left to go down to pick me coffee. That was a big no-no. She was fired as soon as she came back. She fucked up Bigby. Co-worker showed up to work drunk, was told to go home. She mouthed back and started screaming insults at the president of the company. I fired someone who showed up 3 hours late and drunk on their first day. That was a record for me. I was quality assurance for a place that evaluated operations involving explosives. I was leaving soon, so my replacement was hired. I recommended against his hiring because I'd heard bad things and he seemed shady. But they hired him anyway. So on his first day, I was tasked with training him on the job. He was already highly qualified on explosives, more qualified than I was, in fact. Anyway, as we're evaluating a couple of guys working on the internals of a live aim 120 missile, this clown's cell phone goes off in his pocket. To even get into the bay we were in, you have to walk past about 4 signs that say to leave all electronic devices outside, because even tiny amounts of emissions can set off the explosives, especially when the covers are removed disassembled. So I wrote up my replacement with a direct safety violation, and he didn't have a job by the time he got back to the office. Quality assurance's reputation was in the crapper for months. That idiot could have gotten 5 people killed, including himself. First day at work, he took one look at his would be boss and declared, I won't work under a woman. So he was shown the door. Well, at least he got what he wanted. Guy offered the boss cocaine on his second day. We had a new guy, and he lasted for 2 days. Guy was writing a book about government spending and said he was being watched by the FBI. The manager said he was crazy, and they got into a shouting match. Manager put up with him and let it slide. On the second day, he called another co-worker a racist for not letting him do things his way when they were just trying to show him how the work is done. So he walked out. Manager was like, thank God, and fired his ass. New guy comes in and is suspiciously overzealous. Around 11 he takes everyone's lunch order and cash, and just never came back.